Okay, looks like we've got a good number of people here now, so we will kick off. Welcome everyone, my name is Carly Kind and I'm the director of the Ada Lovelace Institute. We're a research institute based in London with a remit to ensure that data and AI work for people and society. And we are thrilled to have you here today for this event, which is the first of a series. And today we'll be speaking about responsible innovation. What does it mean and how can we make it happen? And it's part of a series we're called Taking Back Control of Data, Scrutinising the UK's plans to reform the GDPR. I'll start with some brief housekeeping notes. You can follow along this conversation on Twitter. We are at Ada Lovelace Inst. You can access closed captions for this event by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen, or you can also access a fully adjustable subtitle via stream text, and Hannah will put the link to the stream text in the chat. We're recording this event, but as attendees, your video won't be visible. We will be putting this up on our site afterwards for others to view, and we do tend to get quite a few people watching them after the fact. I am really thrilled today to be joined by three very brilliant minds on related issues to innovation, regulation and data. We've got Tommaso Valletti, who's a professor of economics at Imperial College, Katie Lips, who's head of digital and scams policy at Which, and Ravi Naik, who's the legal director of the digital rights agency AWO. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes introducing why we're here talking about regulation and innovation. Then I'll hand over to our speakers to give their brief thoughts, have some conversations, and we'll definitely be opening it up for your views and your questions from the audience. We're very much designed this event series to make sure it answers questions and helps to build the knowledge of others who are really following along with this data consultation. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box and I will get to them. You can also chat in the chat if you like, but if you put questions in the chat, I might not see them. So put them in the Q&A instead. So today we are here to talk about responsible innovation. And as I said, this is the first of a series of 5 events, which are really exploring the foundational premises of the document that was published by the government earlier this month or late last month, called Data: A New Direction. And Data: A New Direction proposes a series of reforms to the data protection framework in the UK that are designed to deliver quote unquote world-leading data protection standards for the UK in the aftermath of the UK's exit from the European Union. So as the Ada Lovelace Institute, we are developing a response to that consultation, but we also wanted to host this event series to have a conversation about some of the framings and some of the problem statements which ground the consultation, and really try to interrogate them and understand different views about them. We want to understand what the benefits are of the new proposals, but also their challenges, and potentially explore alternative approaches for achieving the goals that have been articulated in the consultation. So today we're kickstarting that event series with a broad question about what is innovation, which is really, really central to this government's proposals around data reform. And we're interested in what innovation means to different people in different contexts, so technical context, legal, ethical. What is its impact on society, and how does it relate to regulation? And therefore, how will the proposed changes to data protection deliver responsible innovation, which is the articulated objective here? Responsible innovation indeed is the focus of the whole first chapter of the consultation document, and the government suggests that parts of the existing data protection law actually present barriers to responsible innovation. So this event will really interrogate that and interrogate the pro-growth, pro-innovation framing. Looking at what is the impact of innovation on society? Is it always good? What does responsible innovation mean? And what do we know about the impact of regulation on innovation? So we have 3 real experts here in the room to help us navigate what can be quite a dense set of issues. And we have about 120 of you in the room as well, and we do hope you'll share your thoughts and ask us questions along the way. So I'm going to turn first to Tommaso, who is very much an expert on these issues. And Tommaso, I wanted to kick us off by asking you, what is the meaning of innovation broadly, and who does it work for, and what is the point of it, I suppose, as a way to start off your intervention. Over to you.
Thank you, Carly. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be together today. I'm an economist based at Imperial College. I suppose I'm also here because I was the chief economist for competition of the European Commission until 2019. So that is kind of a relevant experience. And when you have people which are close to policy, you should always ask them to disclose if there is any conflict of interest. It's important. There is not enough disclosure. So I will disclose that I have nothing to disclose. I'm just back to academia. But again, remember to ask people where they come from. And also an interesting observation before I respond to your question is that in my job as the chief competition economist, and I dealt with quite a few cases involving digital companies we'll be talking about today, the Google, the Facebook, the Amazon. I was talking essentially to a competition law type of crowd, very homogeneous type of thinking, and the privacy people were never part of the conversation. Really a silos approach, and we are trying to break boundaries now, making sure that these different communities, they do talk to each other because they both have to learn from each other, and that's super important to keep this momentum, I think. And I think the Ada Lovelace Institute is doing a great job in that respect. Innovation. So I'll start at a higher level, and then as we go through, we may zoom in. But I will try to say, especially when it comes to innovation and regulation, there is a very simple, I shall say simplistic narrative that regulation kills innovation. And so we should never regulate, unleash market forces, and everything is going to go fine. I said it's simplistic because we need to do an extra step. Innovation as such is not particularly meaningful. We have to say, we have to elaborate on what type of innovation. And I will posit that perhaps it may be useful to think about three types of innovation. I would say there is innovation that creates value, there is innovation that extracts value, and there is innovation that destroys value. So let me elaborate as my first intervention on these 3 points. So innovation that creates value is the innovation we all want, okay? You create, markets where they didn't exist before, opportunities for exchange, for communication, for information, or you bring down costs, you make things more effective, ultimately to the benefit of citizens and users. So that's innovation we all want, which typically requires a good level of competition. And perhaps if everything is, as clean as I am describing, that's where regulation is just perhaps an impediment. You don't want to do too much there. But that's only one part of the 3 types of innovation. There's one innovation, a type of innovation which extracts value. Extract value means that, yes, whatever is created goes to the advantage of corporate profits. So what I have in mind in particular is the business model, of Google. If you allow Google to buy Fitbit, to cross-link data, to, do even more targeted advertising, the ultimate result is that the price for the advertisement will go up. Okay, so this is an increase in the profit for Google, but there is no downstream benefit of that innovation. I'm oversimplifying, but just to give you an example where that innovation, and you see, it is already coming with market power. So innovation with market power is not something that you would expect consumers, citizens, get a fair share of it. And then, and this is perhaps really interesting when it comes to the digital sphere, there is also innovation that destroys value. Some people call this toxic innovation. And this really goes at the core of the business model of some firms. And again, I should refer to Google and Facebook in particular. So these are business models which are based on advertising. Advertising is based on first creating what they call engagement. So they need us on their ecosystem as long as possible to, get information about us, how we behave, get also some information about when we are in an emotional state, which is good enough to show us some ads, because the business model ultimately is to sell ads. But this creates what they call engagement. Some people actually started calling it addiction. So it's clear that people spend too much time on the Facebook. There is economic academic evidence that people regret actually spending exposed, but addiction means you cannot control it. Okay, so the system are designed in a way to capture too much of our time, too much of our attention within a single specific ecosystem, and the ultimate result is again profitable for the company, but hasn't created social value. It has actually destroyed social value because of the addiction it creates. I mean, you must have, I mean, this is maybe too related to recent facts, but the research that Facebook itself did on Instagram and the effects it did produce on teenagers, especially female teenagers, and so forth. So these two second types of innovations are instead innovation where regulation makes very good sense. You do want to regulate in order for those things to be mitigated, and you can have different ways of both regulating, and also I mentioned it's often related to the market power issue, so you should also get more competition there. So regulation and competition can do wonders if you do it the right way. But with these three types of innovation, value creation, value extraction, and value destruction, I think I should stop for now.
Can I follow up with a couple of questions, Tommaso? Is it the case that regulation is always designed to mitigate harms, or can it also incentivize beneficial directions for innovation? And do we have examples of where the regulatory framework itself kind of encourages positive innovation? Is that something that we can see from other sectors? Is that the right way to think about it, I suppose?
Yeah, so regulation, good regulation should take both into account. The one that mitigates harm is the most obvious one. We won't regulate, I mean, we need to wear seat belts when we drive our car. We decided to label food in order to give more information, in order to, to disclose if there is some bad products in our food stuff. But what's interesting in the digital space, some regulation is also happening in order to change the direction of innovation. So one example in a particular comes borrowing. So one of the many types of regulation which have been discussed now in Europe and the equivalent in the UK with the Digital Markets Unit is to make sure that the good externalities don't accrue to a single corporation, to a single firm, but they are shared. So you can have some competition there. So to give you a tangible example, until now, ecosystems are closed. So if you are a British startup, and it's very Darwinian, there's many of them, but the one that succeed, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000, the best option this firm has is to innovate, to be swallowed inside the Google ecosystem, the Facebook ecosystem. So the type of innovation will be an innovation that at best extracts value because it just reinforces, cements the position, the market position of those giants. Instead, with the regulation which is made to make open interfaces, wall-to-wall interoperability and interconnection, the ambition of the British startup will be completely different. It's not just to be bought, you innovate for exit and that's it. You may survive, you may become the disruptor yourself. So that is an innovation which is changing the trajectory, which we cannot anticipate. Obviously, governments are not good at anticipating technological changes, but at least you give those changes a chance which doesn't exist now.
That's a really important point. A final question for you. You spoke before about the siloed nature historically of thinking on competition and privacy. And I wonder if you have any thoughts, having been followed closely the UK's plans on the competition front. And as I understand it, the government plans to introduce legislation around competition and is taking a range of different steps on that front. How do you see that sitting on the one hand, and the clear intention that has been expressed to regulate in particular large platforms, and how do you see that sitting alongside some of the proposals in the data reform consultation, which include liberalizing access to data essentially and making it easier for many, chiefly researchers and small companies, I think, are really at the forefront of government's mind, but the same large platforms will also benefit from a wider scope of access to data. Can those two things be resolved? Can you both tackle competition and allow big platforms to get access to data more easily?
So that's a very big question. I should say it's a good thing that we don't have, or at least we're trying not to have a silos approach any longer. Until recently, it was, data is about consumer protection. Consumer protection has nothing to do with competition. And so that was also the fig leaf. The competition authorities would say, but this is GDPR, it's not for us, it's someone else. But this is a bad approach, because obviously when the business model is completely around our data, how can you analyze competition if you don't understand the data itself? What you said about having initiatives to share data, especially with the academic community, with researchers, is great. One of the many points which I said over the years is that one of the many paradoxes of where we are now is that these digital giants are sitting on the unprecedented trove of data. They're never given a single thing to an independent researcher to see what they're doing. We have to believe what they say. They come up with some results that nobody can vet, which had also the unintended effect, or maybe intended effect, of diverting the academic attention into directions, because we couldn't study those platforms empirically. And so researchers in economics, at least, I don't know other fields, if you don't publish it, if you don't have the data, you cannot publish and you cannot have a career. We studied other industries, other settings, because we never had access to those. And we need regulations there, because voluntarily the companies will never give data. They just see the unintended consequences. But I also want to be mindful that there is lots of externalities going there. To give you an example, I may have particular privacy preferences, but the companies don't need to know about me as Tommaso Valletti, but just somebody like who has my statistical profile. So I may give information about you because you're statistically similar to me, but you have very different privacy preferences. So if I give data about everybody, there are so many leakages that can happen, so many externalities. So I think it's very important that the data protection people tell us about, what does it mean to have, a particular purpose for that. So I would want to limit some collection of data unless it goes through a very agreed standard for data collection, which exists. So in the academic community, if we do medical research, we know how to collect data, how to anonymize them, how to aggregate them, and this has to be shared and made available. The worst, and this is where so the principles which are ongoing in the UK are great, but if I see the experience, and I have in particular in mind the example of DeepMind and the sham with the Royal Free, this is something that the government actually approved. So the information commissioner didn't even impose a fine, also because the tools of it were very limited, and 2.5 million patients, individual patients, had their data swallowed by DeepMind, and we have no clue. I'm sure they promised they would do the great thing for detecting a kidney disease, whatever it was, but we have no idea where this data went. I am at Imperial College. There is a fantastic medical school here, and no researcher would ever be able to have access to the same data to do research. And we've put ourselves we've privatized something which is potentially a common good, and that's the worst situation that can actually happen. So the precedents we have in this country are not particularly good.
Really interesting. I want to come back at Ravi. I'll give you a heads up. I'm interested in whether we need a kind of two-tiered system of rules. Do we need one set of rules for researchers and others, and another for platforms or bad actors? We can come back to that shortly. I'm going to go first to Katie. So Katie, as I said, is coming to us from which is a consumer protection body, of course, we all know and love. And I'm really interested to talk to Katie about what consumers want from innovation and what they want from regulation. When I was preparing for this, I found an old Nesta report. It's quite old now, so 2014, in which they segmented the population on the basis of their attitudes to innovation. And the largest segment was what they call innovation realists, which was 35% of the population, who said they appreciate innovation, but they're not excited by it. They think ethics and rights are more important than innovation and progress. And I wonder if that still resonates with you now in terms of what you know about consumer preferences, or how are things changing, and how do consumers see innovation in their lives?
Thank you, Carly. It's great to be here. And that is a really interesting question. I have quite a lot, which I will come on to. I have quite a lot of questions, actually. So, what does innovation mean to consumers? What do consumers mean to innovation? I think that's very important. Do we all know what we really mean by responsible innovation? And do we all know what we really mean by innovation? I've worked in the innovation space for many years as head of innovation for a large global loyalty business, and also I've launched an AI-powered moonshot for a professional services firm. I've also launched my own businesses. And so I've done innovation and seen how it works. But I think more importantly than that, as a consumer, I benefit from every day, we all do, from all the wealth of digital services that we use. But I do have some issues with how this conversation about innovation is going. So we hear the government wants a regime that's pro-innovation, but by eroding privacy, I think we're in danger of really alienating consumers that we need at the heart of that innovation process. We're perhaps in danger of hampering the one thing that we need the most. And why do we need innovation so badly anyway? What kind of innovation? To Tommaso's point, do we want disruptive innovation or responsible innovation? And is that different actually from consumer-centric innovation? So for me, innovation is all about challenge, questioning, disrupting. It's uncomfortable, it's risky. You have to challenge not just what you do, but also how you think and your beliefs. It's not business as usual. In business as usual, the fundamentals of your business are the same. You just keep doing what you're doing a bit better year on year, but your beliefs are still the same. Your operating model is still fundamentally the same. Disruptive innovation, on the other hand, usually comes from left of field. Incumbents fail to spot the innovators coming, and very rarely do incumbents innovate themselves, as to do so would be to challenge themselves so very much, potentially disrupting whole parts of their existing business and their beliefs. And it's hard for anyone to imagine doing that, actually. So sure, big tech were the innovators once. They brought us all sorts of stuff and we collectively loved it as consumers. We use it all the time. But I think that relationship is fading or being challenged, certainly, because of the consumer's relationship with data as we start to understand it more. So, I'm thinking about what will happen of big tech in this pro-innovation future. Will they remain the innovators? Do they want to be disrupted? Perhaps they believe that they can't be disrupted. I don't know. But what do consumers really want innovating? At which our work in the digital space tells us that we are starting, as consumers, we're starting to get a little bit more wary of data, our own data and data about us that is shared with private companies. We want more control. So consumer-centric innovation, for me, would look like greater control over data, giving people more choice, more transparency. A regime that diminishes our rights doesn't seem like innovation at all. And, reflecting previous points, I think a regime that makes big tech stronger and blocks new innovators from challenging these now old business models also doesn't seem right. It seems that we've perhaps misunderstood it somehow. So, as a consumer, I want more choice. I want it to be possible for other players to enter the market and not be blocked out. I doubt that true innovation will come from the incumbents. I think they will be doing, enhanced business as usual and not really innovation at all unless they change their beliefs about how to operate. And then the vital ingredient of innovation in the digital space is consumers and their data. And the danger of not having enough regulation, of skewing too far to business needs with not enough concern for data privacy, means you simply don't get consumers to share their data to make the innovations a success in the first place. So I just think we mustn't forget consumers in this conversation, as without them, there's really no innovation at all.
It's really clarifying, actually, Katie, to hear you talk about how innovation is about disrupting business as usual, because it does feel like one of the challenges around this consultation is that it doesn't seek to disrupt the existing business model, which is a database business model, but rather open it up for others to replicate, which actually then wouldn't really meet your definition of innovation in a way.
No, it wouldn't. I think that you're absolutely right. What's being proposed just seems to accelerate the status quo. And it's as if we've called that innovation, because that once was innovation. Innovation today, though, should be to change that and to do better than that and to keep making things better. If innovation is making things continually better for somebody, whoever it is, and let's say in the consumer space, you want to see some of that challenge. You don't want to just see it amplified.
Yeah, that's right. In your mind, does the consultation focus enough on the preferences of consumers as well as innovators, or do you feel that it's too skewed? And I suppose it would be important to say that innovators are also consumers, of course. At the end of the day, people running companies in this country are also citizens and consumers themselves. But do you feel, to the extent you've read it, and I won't make that presumption because it's a hugely dense and lengthy document, not everyone does that for fun, but do you feel like it gets the right balance between consumers and innovators?
Not yet, and certainly, at which we're already working on our response. It's a huge document, and we have a large team of people working on it because it's also really complex and touches lots of issues, and that's an important point in itself. We don't feel that it gives enough attention to consumers or citizens or patients or whoever the group is. It's business focused. It's about, I really just believe it's about allowing advertising based business models to continue to prosper and grow and develop and do that stuff without much attention. So we're actually bringing some consumer engagement to our response. We're doing a panel in a few weeks where we're talking to consumers about how they feel about some of the proposals, and we'll be happy to share some of the results of that at a later stage. But I think that actually talking to consumers is always the most valuable thing, getting their feedback. There's a funny issue, I think, with this particular consultation, which is it can be spun an interesting way when you say to people, wouldn't you just like it to be simpler when you use the internet, not to have to click on those annoying cookie banners? Most people would say, yeah, that sounds really good. Let's get rid of all of that. But when you actually talk to people about what consents they're not going to have to give, as in they're giving up control and ownership of those decisions, just, in a really hands-off way, when you realize what you lose, people start to challenge that and think, oh, actually, no, that's not right. I don't want my data to be used in this way, or I don't want my data to be taken, or I don't want cookies to automatically be dropped on my computer, and all of these things. So I think, you can sort of make the argument that making it simpler is something we all want, perhaps, but I think when you actually talk to people about the controls they want to have, they want to keep that too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that last point actually, which is presumably people don't necessarily think the status quo is that wonderful either when it comes to their data. And how do you interpret that? If you consider, does that lead to an argument which is that we need to dismantle the status quo, or does it lead to something else? And do you have you done, kind of outside of the context of this consultation, have you done any consultation with members of the public about the GDPR and their experiences of that and how they feel about it more broadly?
So which has historically done engagement with consumers about how they feel about data. I think our last version of that was a couple of years ago now. And that was called Control Alt Delete. And we recently did a study called Are You Following Me, which was, I think, last year. And we've just updated another version of that report called Are You Still Following Me? And that's all about ad tracking and how consumers actually feel when they're tracked through the internet. And again, it's the point about, you might think on the surface it's fine, but when you learn what's really going on under the hood and just how much you're being tracked online through everything you do, if you don't do things to stop that, then it can actually be very shocking for people, and both those reports that we've launched highlight those issues. So yeah, certainly people are becoming, and it's in an increasing trend. So it's not just that some people are uncomfortable with this, it's that more people are more uncomfortable with it over time as we hear more about it, as we individually learn more about it. And I think consumers are becoming really quite data savvy. They're not, this isn't something that they don't understand, actually. And so we do need to engage with them, talk to them. I think government needs to engage with them more as well.
Absolutely. Even if they understand it more, they still also don't necessarily feel the agency to do something about it, which is part of the challenge. Thank you so much, Katie. I'm going to move to Ravi, and I would encourage our audience to pop some questions in the Q&A if anything comes to mind. Ravi, I'm interested to turn to you as our resident data protection geek on this panel to ask you, what role does data protection play when it comes to innovation? How can data protection itself support innovation if that's something we decide we want? And how does data protection and data rights more broadly balance the dynamics of power over data?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. There's fantastic questions. Firstly, thanks for inviting me to be part of this fantastic panel. I had planned to attend as a viewer, so it's really great to be on the panel and actually be part of the conversation. So I think it's important to step back and actually understand what the GDPR, which is what we're talking about, is currently framed as. On the one hand, it seeks to protect data protection as a fundamental human right. That's the first recital. And the second recital, it's about exploitation of data for economic reasons. It's about providing a charter of rights to balance those two competing interests, to give individuals control over how their information is used and obligations over those that can control our information. And the Information Commissioner put it quite well by saying innovation is enabled, not threatened, by high data protection standards. And that really goes to the points the other panelists, and particularly Katie's been talking about in terms of trust and ensuring that when you are innovating, you are imbuing that innovation with trust, and putting data protection at the heart of that does really embed trust in people so they understand what rights they have over this technology and the impact that technology might have. But looking at the document itself, I think it's worth pointing out that it's quite a nuanced and diligent document. Clearly quite a lot of thought has gone into it. I could probably address the 446 pages if we had enough time to, but to start with some of the positive stuff in there. For example, the compulsory transparency reporting on the use of algorithms by public authorities. It's probably a really good idea and a good, good development. And the idea of consolidating research exemptions, probably a good thing, but could probably be achieved through guidance from the ICO or just a pamphlet. I'm not sure you need to throw out the whole GDPR to do that. And for me, it's really helpful to illustrate some of the key issues that my work touches on when we're looking at this document, because I'm a lawyer, I work for clients. It's really helpful to say, this is what happens in practice. This is what's happening with individuals on the ground. So for example, I want to talk about two quick issues on my work. Firstly, the research suggestions, and secondly, legitimate interest and what's been suggested there. So on the research exemptions, I think there's a lot of focus on this because, as you say, a lot of this proposal is about innovation and research and developing technology. But if you look at the GDPR and the way it's framed, research is really a core element of it. And Carly, your question to me about these two tiers, it's already kind of embedded in the GDPR. There is a whole regime carved out for research. And I'm currently working with the European Digital Media Observatory about creating a code of conduct for researchers and platforms to facilitate active research and gathering of data from platforms to researchers. And what we see during the course of that work is it's just such a big and complicated document. If you consolidated everything, provided some guidance, provided a code, that would help the platforms, that would help researchers, that provided some algorithmic flowcharts, as it were, you know, the step-by-step, this is where you place responsibility, liability. That can cure a lot of these issues that have been raised in this consultation without having to minimize the safeguards of individual rights that we see as the compromise. And to that end, turning to the idea of legitimate interests and extending the definition of legitimate interests. So the government's proposed an exhaustive list of potential measures. And one of the examples they've given is the use of real-time bidding as a issue that needs to be clarified by extending the idea of legitimate interest with this exhaustive list. And the government says that personalized advertising requires knowledge about an individual and that analytics cookies are low risk. I think Katie's very well demonstrated that both of those things may be open to question. I would question the premise of that. I mean, it's important to underscore the legality of these practices is open to question. And through our client work, we're challenging some of these practices. And the pop-ups that are cited in the government's consultation document are probably the result of potential illegality of these tracking mechanisms. And the framework that's tried to be put in place to get around that potential illegality is more of a veneer of of legality to seek consent. And I think when you distill it to its constituent elements, it doesn't really meet the conditions for consent of what those pop-ups are trying to actually achieve. And the problem is a deficit of enforcement rather than the law being wrong. And I think if we enforce the law as our clients are trying to get regulators to do, we might find that those cookie pop-ups that people find so annoying don't exist, because people should only be monitored and tracked in those ways if it's lawful. And I think you have to start to now think about the real world impact of some of those practices. So for example, vulnerable gamblers are being tracked and profiled and nudged towards addictive behaviors as a result of these practices. And the net result may be just to ingrain and embed this automated behavioral segmentation that we see through our work. I'm aware I could keep going on, but just a few final points. One of the other issues for me when I think about innovation is, from a lawyer's perspective, there's going to be a new regime of compliance the business is going to have to adhere to if this all comes in. And that would maybe prevent innovation if there's another cost to business, if there's a whole new regime of data protection that has to be complied with. A second issue is an issue to do with adequacy. The European Commission has given the UK a green light that we have an adequate level of data protection. If that gets jeopardized, there's a risk to the future of data flows between Europe and the UK, which again may negatively impact innovation. And I think Katie summed it up really well, that this is not about trying to maybe disrupt existing protections and consumers to allow innovation. You might just be embedding the systems we currently have. And I think it definitely needs a nuanced thought as to what we're actually compromising when we're thinking about these proposals.
It's really interesting what you say. You said at the start about, could this be answered through a kind of a pamphlet? It does seem that some of the concerns, very real concerns that are raised by researchers, for example, and Tommaso talked about this, are a result of misinterpretation or bad interpretation of the existing rules rather than a problem with the rules themselves. I wonder if I wanted to ask you about, though, the role of the ICO and the role of regulators, and whether or not you think there are changes there that can be made usefully to the separately from the content of the regulation, to the role of regulators and enforcement bodies when it comes to data protection. And related to that, Tommaso raised this point about researchers having access to data in order to be able to scrutinize platforms. And is that something that we can imagine within existing regulation, or do we need new rules to be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great point. I think just starting with the second question, this is the work we're doing with the European Digital Media Observatory, putting together a code of conduct, working with platforms and researchers to say GDPR is not a barrier to this. GDPR has a really well thought through framework to facilitate access to data by researchers. And actually what's probably missing is just a consolidation of those rules and some clearer guidance as to where a lawful basis may be legitimate. Another good example in the consultation is, well, what's the definition of scientific research? Does it include social sciences research? Does it include the humanities? Things like that could be clarified quite easily through a code or some guidance. It doesn't need an entire rewriting of the law. So I think we are currently working on facilitating a code towards clarifying the GDPR. I think one thing to add to that, in a very British context, if you read the Data Protection Act, there are huge swathes of the GDPR cut out in the Data Protection Act for academic purposes, for research. So there's already quite a lot of deference. And I think people just, it's buried in a schedule that probably only me and a few other nerdy lawyers have looked at. That's a problem. It shouldn't be for lawyers to provide these answers. It should be clear to researchers and platforms. And to your first question about the regulator, I think the Information Commission does some really good work, particularly with guidance. I think the ICO is very good. The guidance they put out is really useful. I come at this acting for a lot of claimants and individuals that have been impacted by the practices of platforms. I would like a more proactive regulator that maybe seeks to enforce the law more. I think if the Information Commissioner had enforced the law about ad tech and real-time bidding properly, we would not have cookie pop-ups, and the Secretary of State's concerns to do with cookie pop-ups would not exist, because the legality of those practices would probably end, and the veneer of legality would end with it. But we're pursuing that in other jurisdictions, and it might end anyway. But in any event, because of that work, big platforms like Google and well, not Facebook, but Google are trying to phase out the use of third-party cookies as well. So the reality and continuation of such technology is open to question anyway.
Yeah, cookie notices have been terrible PR for the GDPR in a way, in a kind of perverse way, haven't they? Even though they don't really come from the GDPR, but they do make people feel like that's a regulatory intervention gone wrong, when it's perhaps better phrased as a market response to regulatory intervention gone wrong. A final question. So Richard Beaumont in the Q&A asks about the role of accountability in ensuring responsible innovation. One of the sets of proposals in the reform consultation document is about removing some of the accountability mechanisms like DPIAs, the data protection impact assessments, which are required at the moment for high risk innovations off the back of data, and the role of the data protection officer, I believe, is also proposed to become voluntary, where at the moment it is mandatory in organizations over a certain size, I think. And Ravi, I just wonder if you have any experience in seeing how have DPIAs operated in practice over the last few years. Have you seen it yield positive results around accountability? Has it improved accountability in the data space, and therefore what might removing them mean?
That's a really good question. I mean, it does seem like regulatory burden rather than something real. But if you look at two cases where failure to do DPIs have been taken to court, one is automated facial recognition technology and the Bridges challenge, and that was successful. The police didn't do a proper impact assessment on what that meant. And as a result, they didn't do a proper impact on the equalities impact that such facial recognition technology had. So I think that's a really good tangible example of using this simple system of a data protection impact assessment may have reduced subsequent consequences. And the second one is the test and trace system in this country was deployed without a data protection impact at all. The government conceded in the case that I was a lawyer on that they had acted unlawfully and not following through with that. And it might just sound like, it was the pandemic, it was a bunch of red tape. But we saw the reality of not doing the data protection impact assessment was that the system itself was quite flawed. It was just an Excel sheet, it was open to exploitation, and it had a bunch of vulnerabilities. If that simple exercise had been gone through at the outset, we might have had a better test and trace system. So I think they're really important elements, and I don't think they are such a burden. We're talking about high risk processing. Not all processing is high risk. I think it is appropriate to measure the impact of high risk processing before you do it.
Thank you, Ravi. Really, really interesting. We've got some good questions from the audience, so I'm going to play those back to you now. Tommaso, somebody asks about the relationship between innovation and growth, and I think in the consultation document there's a very strong. The two are often sat side by side. The approach is described as pro-growth, pro-innovation. And from an economic standpoint, is it the case that growth is reliant on innovation? Are the two the same thing, or can you have growth without innovation, or vice versa?
So there's so many questions in the chat and so many responses to the previous speakers. So I'm going to deflect.
Sorry, I should have also asked, would you like to come in on anything? We have only 15 minutes
and I just want to spend a few. There's another question by Oliver in the chat asking about the evidence about consumer caring about privacy. And I want to first answer that. So historically, we do have evidence that in the early days of competition between social networks, so Facebook was actually a follower and MySpace, I mean, you're too young, but MySpace was the leader, and Facebook differentiated itself in the early years by claiming they could offer more privacy to their own users, and there were, chats and user groups that would determine what was the acceptable level of privacy that people wanted, and then Facebook committed to implementing that. Then Facebook won the battle against MySpace, became a monopoly, especially for people aged 20 and above, and they unilaterally removed that clause. And so from that point onwards, Facebook did what Facebook wanted to do, and people wouldn't be heard any longer. So there is a clear relationship that when there was a little bit of competition, privacy was one of the dimensions. And if you think about it, especially as these social networks, they seem to be for free, the only dimension left is quality, and privacy is a dimension of it. So you would expect that to happen. Other examples, that you need to interpret it in the light of competition and market power, which is not, to stop the silence approach, is that despite all the recent debacle of WhatsApp, of Facebook, etc., on the usage of our data, people cannot move. So that's not evidence that people don't care. It's evidence that people are stuck. They're stuck with monopolies, which are not interconnected. You may download Signal. If none of your friends is on Signal, you're going to use it very much. If none of your chats is interoperable with other stuff, you're not going to use it. So competition is important. At the same time, it's fascinating to hear what Ravi was saying, and something I would like to continue is when Ravi is saying that privacy is a fundamental right. Intuitively, that sounds about right. That's true. I mean, yes, but then if I put on my hat as an economist, I don't understand what that means. So I need to learn from Ravi how to, because then us, the economists, are going to be at the sitting table with the policymakers trying to, and we do trade-offs, we can calculate prices, maybe we can calculate something about privacy. But if I find, what does it mean? We tend to quantify, and if we just stop there, the discussion, it's a fundamental right, then it's not helpful for us economists. Instead, we want to learn. So this is where the conversation has to continue. The last things perhaps that I can say is that somebody was asking about artificial intelligence and regulation. There's a wonderful paper, I'm not going to advertise my work, by a colleague at MIT called Daron Acemoglu. I mean, today they awarded the Nobel Prizes in economics, and Daron is going to be a winner in the next 10 years. He's just too young. He's just produced a paper called AI Harms, okay? And he has a whole set of potential harm that can arise from artificial intelligence, a lot. So it's a nice structure to think about the negatives. But then he concludes by saying, these are theories. I can see through that, but we have zero available evidence because we don't have access to data, which reiterates the necessity, the urgency of the data issues for independent academic communities. Otherwise, we are, in the hand of the best narrative. The player that can dictate the best narrative to the policymakers, to the politician, is going to be the winner, okay? Not based on any evidence, but just on the stories they can tell. And in this respect, I don't like, for instance, an article that was today in the Financial Times, which was America has lost in AI against China. So again, we go into this, if we don't allow our own AI industry to emerge, we'll be losers, we'll losers to China and to the US. We have to rush, this sense that we have to rush because otherwise it's too late. And this is where we have to step back. Collectively, it's not easy, also because we were talking about consumers. Who are they? I know there's Cathy and which, but that's like a drop in a big ocean. So people are underrepresented by definition and always will be, because it's a problem of collective action. So this is where we have to step back and think about, forget about the current incumbents, the big names, and try to put ourselves in our digital future. What do you think our digital future will be acceptable in terms of jobs, equality, the way we use our data? Do we want to keep it for ourselves, use it as a digital currency? There's lots of things. There will be a heterogeneity of views, but we must have a diversity of views now. Imagine the future, and then only then we'll be able to find some answers to our digital present. Because if you do the inverse, there are small problems now. It's what a guy called Evgeny Morozov called technological solutionism. We see a technological problem, and we're going to find that the technological fixes to that technological problem, but the narrative will be always the same. Our future will still be depending on the big platform in the next 20 years. So let's start to paradoxically try to forget about them for a moment, but ask ourselves, what do we want? And only then we will be able to think about some good solutions to the current problems we have.
Really insightful. Thank you so much, Tommaso, dropping some real truth bombs there. In particular, I like the challenge to use regulation or use policy processes to imagine the future we want, rather than just responding to the harms that we see now. But also this notion that whoever presents the best narrative to policymakers will be the most convincing. And I think that is definitely part of the challenge, and hence why we wanted to have this conversation around narratives, because it's a very strong argument to make that pro-growth, pro-innovation is good for this country, particularly in the aftermath of a crisis. And none of us would disagree that we want to see growth and innovation in that context, but really picking it apart is so important. Katie, I wanted to turn a question to you, which says, what regulatory disruption would you like to see unleashed following this consultation? If you could have any kind of disruptive approach to regulation, would you know what that is at the moment? Or are you waiting to see what your engagement with consumers looks like? And any other reflections you have on the conversation so far, please feel free to throw in there as well.
Yeah, well, this is, I mean, it's a really interesting question. I'm afraid I can't answer it in relation to specifically this consultation, but I can answer it in general terms because, so how do we currently regulate? We wait until we spot some harm, and then we define it, quantify it, take quite a while to develop policy to fix it, take an even bigger while to develop legislation to fix it, and then all of that passage of the bill through Parliament, etc. The process to actually get something in place from start to finish is years long. And so I would like to see, in an ideal world, if we could innovate that would be amazing. If we could innovate the time it takes to regulate for something, and if we could also turn that on its head and look at proactive regulation as opposed to reactive regulation. My gut feel, and I need to find more evidence to support this, but my gut feel is that the proposals that we have for In Data, a New Direction are rather reactive based on where we are today and about making some changes to that. And I don't think they go far enough to think about what might come 5 years down the line or even later, and look at how we provide frameworks to cater for those scenarios.
It's a great point. I also wanted to cheekily put to you a question in the Q&A, but tell me if you don't want to answer it. With your hat, your former hat as an innovator and someone who has worked as head of innovation, what was your experience of data protection governance in working in that kind of frontline practical way? And is there do you feel that it can be done in a way that's consistent with permitting an agile approach to innovation, or does it always create barriers?
So working with teams of innovators, people like to I think the term is move fast and break things. You kind of get on with stuff. That can be seen as a bad thing, but it can also be a good thing because you can get lots done, you can learn and, fail fast, test and learn, and fail and then learn more, is absolutely how everybody approaches it in a kind of agile way. I think that, is there a kind of better way of working, or a way that's more responsible? Probably. When you want to innovate in a business context, you're not sat there reading the GDPR. You're just not. To Ravi's point, I mean, not many people have read the GDPR. I've read it a long time ago, but not many people have, and not many people who work in data or in digital service design or product design and all those disciplines of product management, this is not necessarily on their radar. They want to deliver an experience for consumers. It's the customer experience that matters. It's not necessarily the regulation. And then maybe, if you're lucky, you'll be working somewhere big enough where a team of clued up lawyers can get involved and help you make this work. But it would be even better if those people were talking from the beginning, because then you would get, better innovation that leverage, well, what's the art of the possible? What do we need to think about ethically? And how can we build a good consumer experience? If you could do all those things together, I think we'd be in a better place.
It's a great point. Perhaps we need GDPR/data protection education in schools so that everybody's coming into the workforce with a real understanding. It strikes me, just to say, I've also read the GDPR many times, but it's been a few years. But it is quite a and probably one of the failings. It's relatively simply written in the context of all things data, and probably more simple than the consultation document itself, which, to Ravi's point, is very thoughtful, very nuanced, very detailed, and very complex. But anyway, that's just an anecdotal aside. I'm going to come to Ravi to wrap us up, because we've got a couple of minutes left. Ravi, I can see that Sophia from the ICO has put in the chat that, as the regulator, the Sandbox has provided them with a platform to support some innovation under the GDPR/Data Protection Act. I wonder to ask the same question I asked Katie, which is if you could see one kind of disruptive role for the regulator or for regulation in this space, what would you like to see? What had you hoped you'd see in the data reform consultation to make the environment more protective of data rights?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because I think the GDPR is still quite young. It's not, you know, a decades-old instrument, even though it's an evolution of older norms. It's still relatively new. And one of the newer innovations is the tasks and powers given to the Information Commissioner. So, you know, if I was thinking of regulatory disruption, I would firstly try to empower the ICO even more, handle more cases, get more out there so that people can understand what's going on. I mean, I think the ICO's focus and guidance is really good, but it would be good to see some real enforcement action. If I was thinking about disruption, I think this idea of opening up algorithmic audits is a really good one. I know the Ada Lovelace Institute is doing a lot of work on that. I think it's a fantastic idea and it's future-proofed in the way we're talking about. And I think secondly, it would be really good to see some more meaningful transparency. And I think, Kylie, this goes to your point, GDPR is quite simple in a lot of ways. And that simplicity means lawyers can try to wriggle out of a lot of things. And I think actually transparency makes a lot of difference, and meaningful transparency makes a lot of meaningful difference. So I think those are the two things I'd like to see. I think it needs time. GDPR needs time to work properly. And Sophia's just put in, the ICO is developing guidance on research provisions on the UK GDPR. It's definitely worth us speaking about the code of conduct that's coming under the EU GDPR, Sophia, because I guess they should be complementary.
Looks like the pamphlet that you ordered is on the way, which is great. Thank you everyone so much. Tommaso, Katie, Ravi, really fascinating conversation. Great to have you all here from your different disciplines and perspectives feeding in from various angles. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us and staying till the end. We're having another event on Thursday, same time, 2 p.m. Thursday. That one will be focused on lessons learned from COVID data sharing and data access. So a big part of the consultation is very much around how do we permanently instantiate some of the temporary measures that were taken during COVID around data sharing in the public sector, for example. So we want to really interrogate that one next. So please do join us. You can register on our website. And thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks, everyone.